Last night at about 2 a.m. Moscow time, there were what appeared to be 2 explosions due to drones that flew over Moscow and exploded either in the Kremlin or very near the Kremlin. The Kremlin itself is it's a series of buildings. It's not just one building. The Kremlin is an area right in Moscow where the Russian parliament meets, where the Russian president works, where the Russian government functions. And it appears as though these drones crashed directly into those facilities. So here you see the Wall Street Journal with this article. Russian government says Kremlin hit by Ukraine drones, blames Kiev. Moscow says nobody injured. Ukraine says it wasn't involved. Now, this idea Russian government says Kremlin hit by Ukraine is way too tentative, given that we've seen the video of it happening. Let's watch the explosions over the Kremlin captured by multiple video cameras last night. So that's pretty definitive. I don't think that merits a headline of Russian government says Kremlin was hit. I suppose they can have skepticism that the Kremlin says it was hit by Ukraine drones, but clearly the Kremlin was hit. So let's look at what the Wall Street Journal has to say about what happened here. Quote, 2 drones crashed into the Kremlin early Wednesday, according to the Russian government, which blamed Kiev for the attack in the heart of Moscow that could embarrass President Vladimir Putin as he tries to rally support for his war effort in Ukraine. Russia sent an electronic warfare system down 2 unmanned aircraft, which exploded over the Kremlin grounds. The Kremlin said no one was injured and no major damage was caused. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky denied that Ukraine was behind the attack. Quote, we didn't attack Putin, he said in Helsinki, where he was meeting with the leaders of Nordic states. We leave it to the tribunal. An advisor to Mr. Zelensky, Milayo Podolakya, suggested those responsible were domestic opponents of Mr. Putin. If Ukraine or its supporters were behind the attack, it would highlight serious vulnerabilities at the heart of Russian power, days ahead of Victory Day, a major Russian holiday commemorating Moscow's victory over Nazi Germany. It comes before Ukraine's planned offensive aimed at retaking territory from Russian troops in the country's east and south. Questions were also, okay, you probably remember when Nord Stream pipeline was blown up a couple of months ago, which was the vital infrastructure linking Russia to Germany that allowed the Russians to sell natural gas to Western Europe through Germany. And at the time that it was blown up, even though Biden was on video along with Victoria Nuland threatening to blow it up, and even though Victoria Nuland celebrated the fact that it was blown up, giggling with Ted Cruz in a Senate hearing, Western officials told the Western media to tell everybody that it was likely Russia that blew up its own pipeline. And then the Western media proceeded to do that. The most laughable propaganda ever. So now we're about to be told that perhaps the Kremlin attacked itself. From the Wall Street Journal, quote, questions were also raised as to whether the Kremlin itself was responsible for the incident, which some observers noted could give Mr. Putin political cover for further military mobilization. Quote, here's the Russians. The Kiev regime made an attempt to strike with unmanned aerial vehicles on the Kremlin residence of the President of the Russian Federation. The Kremlin said we regard these actions as a planned terrorist attack and an attempt on the life of the President of the Russian Federation carried out on the eve of Victory Day, it added. Victory Day is celebrated on May 9th. The Kremlin said it reserved the right to take retaliatory measures. Russia's military has previously threatened to strike Kiev's government headquarters following earlier Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. The situation is changing dramatically, Sergei Markov, director of the Pro-Kremlin Institute for Political Studies, said on Telegram. This is a sharp escalation. Yeah, I would say it's a sharp escalation if, never mind the truth for the moment, if Moscow believes that the Ukrainians just carried out an attempted assassination against Vladimir Putin. Let's just think about how we in the United States would react if we believed that China or Iran carried out an attempted assassination on a major US leader on US soil. What would we do? Look at what we did from a one-day attack on 9/11. The 20 years of bombing in multiple countries and invasions that led to. Imagine if there was an attempt to assassinate our president or some major leader on US soil using a military drone, what we would do. And again, the perception is the key. So if the Russians believe that the Ukrainians did this, and why wouldn't they be the most likely suspect? The dangers of escalation are severe. Here's the Washington Post report from September, trying to get people to believe the EU warns of robust response against sabotage after Nord Stream blast, and it suggested that the EU and various EU officials believed that it was Russia that blew up their own pipeline. Now they're trying the same thing with the Kremlin, that they attacked themselves. But I think the key issue here to remember is that the US is an active player in this war. We're the ones providing the Ukrainians with $100 billion in arms and all kinds of aid, as are the Europeans. This is a proxy war between Russia and the United States, as even Leon Panetta, the former CIA director under President Obama, has said. And the question that we always get back to whenever we face these incredibly serious dangers from this war is, why is it worth incurring these risks when this war is really about nothing other than who will end up governing various provinces in eastern Ukraine that have no vital resources or interests at all to the United States? What is the end game of this war? How is the United States ever going to get out of this war? How will Ukraine or Russia ever get out of this war? The only two possibilities is that Ukraine expels Russia from every inch of Ukrainian territory that it regards as its own, including Crimea, which will never, ever, ever happen. The Russians will never, ever accept that the NATO and the West can control Crimea through Ukraine, its proxy, or even those provinces right on the Russian border. That will never, ever happen. Because whether you agree with it or not, in the Russian mind, controlling Crimea and controlling those provinces in eastern Ukraine are existential for Russian interests. They will never accept, this is a nuclear-armed power, they will never accept a humiliation where they are expelled from every inch of Ukrainian territory. On the other hand, given all the rhetoric that has come out of Ukraine and the United States, how will it ever be possible to end this war with allowing Russia any kind of advancement of its goals, including making those regions in eastern Ukraine that want to be part of Moscow and not Kiev because they're ethnic Russian-speaking loyalists to Moscow, semi-autonomous or autonomous or some combination thereof? It's become so binary. Either Ukraine wins everything, which Russia will never allow, or Russia wins everything, which the West can't allow, that it's hard to see how this war will ever end. And every day that goes by literally brings further serious escalatory risks. 3 weeks ago on April 12th, there was a miscommunication that nearly led to a Russian jet shooting down a British plane filled with British soldiers. From the New York Times, there you see the headline, miscommunication nearly leads to Russian jet shooting down British spy plane. Recently leaked intelligence documents called the incident last year a near shootdown. Officials said it was more serious than originally thought. Quote, a Russian fighter jet fired a missile at a manned British surveillance aircraft flying over the Black Sea in September, but the munition malfunctioned, according to U.S. defense officials in a recently leaked classified U.S. intelligence report. The incident was far more serious than originally portrayed and could have amounted to an act of war. According to U.S. defense officials, the Russia pilot had misinterpreted what a radar operator on the ground was saying to him and thought he had permission to fire. The pilot, who had locked on the British aircraft, fired, but the missile did not launch properly. In October, Britain's Defense Secretary Ben Wallace described the close call in a briefing to parliamentary members as potentially dangerous after the Russian fighter jet released a missile in the vicinity of the British aircraft. But one of the leaked documents said the September 29th event was a, quote, near shoot-down event. What would have happened had that munition functioned and Russia inadvertently blew out of the sky a British plane filled with British soldiers? Technically, it would have been an attack on NATO. The US would be duty-bound to defend the UK. Imagine how quickly that could escalate. Now, for all the denials that Kiev is issuing, oh, we're not responsible for this drone attack on the Kremlin, here from the Kiev Post, which is an independent newspaper in Ukraine, is a tweet from an article where they say, quote, Ukrainian Postal Service, Ukroposhta, announced the launch of a new stamp after the night attack on the Kremlin. And there you see the new stamp where a Ukrainian official is extending his middle finger and celebrating the attack on the Kremlin. So if the Ukrainians really want to plausibly deny responsibility for this attack, they should probably stop celebrating it officially in their stamps. Otherwise, Moscow probably will become increasingly convinced that they tried to kill Vladimir Putin. And if you were Vladimir Putin and senior Russian officials, you can only imagine what you would be thinking about doing in response. What would the United States be thinking about doing in response if a foreign adversary tried to kill one of our leaders, especially our senior leaders on U.S. soil? Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.